Okay, so Wendy, why don't you tell me about an experience you've had that made it a challenge for you to travel?
Okay, so this happened in the Toronto International Airport. I think it's called Pearson. And I was on my way back from South Korea, traveling ultimately to Baltimore. Now, I'd never been to Toronto Airport going back to domestic travel. And so I didn't know how far away anything was. Now, I've got knee problems, I've got back problems, I've got type 2 diabetes, I've got asthma, I've got PTSD, and everything is working overtime. We arrive in the international terminal, and I've got to go through customs, I've got to go through Canadian security, and all within I have like an hour to make it to my connecting flight to get back to Baltimore. And when I told some people that, they were like, oh, I don't know if you're going to make it. I didn't have anything to get me through the line faster. I didn't have global entry to necessarily get through customs, to get through U.S. customs faster. The only way I made it was to actually use the disability line. Oh, there goes my dog. Live show, everybody. And so by the time I made it to the U.S. customs agent, I was sweating, my blood sugar was low, and I was breathing heavily, and he nearly had to call for medical help for me. But I had sugar in my bag. I had my inhaler on me. I was like, no, just let me through. I need to get to my flight. I will deal with it later. But I barely made it. If I had to wait, if I waited in the regular lines, I would not have made my connecting flight at all. But it was just by the grace of using the disability lines, which I was fully entitled to, that I was able to do it.
All right. And so we're going to talk more about that. Tonight's show, our guest is Wendy Coop. And I did get that right?
Yes.
Okay. I meant to ask before the show started. And so we're talking about traveling with visible and invisible disabilities. And it's interesting. Wendy and I are both in a Facebook group, and there'll be a link in the descriptions, both on Facebook and on my YouTube video. But we find that there's so many challenges for people that travel, and a lot of times there's nobody that shares information to help them. So this channel, this show, and the Facebook group are all designed to try to help people that are traveling with disabilities. In my case, the disability isn't mine. My wife travels with a wheelchair, and just a little bit of quick backstory. It started because we were trying to find out some specific information for a cruise. It had to do with beach wheelchairs in Harvest Key, which is NCL's private island.
Oh, wow.
And I searched everywhere, and I could not find that information. And I am like, as much information is out there, you'd think that would be there, but it wasn't. So I said, I'm going to fix that problem. So Wendy, tell us a little more about your background and some of the things you do. I know you're active in social media.
Yes. So I am just starting up a blog called youdon'tlookdisabled.com, and it's about traveling and living with invisible disabilities. I'm also a pastor and a stand-up comedian, and I talk about everything, going to therapy, doing geeky things, and whatever strikes my fancy that I think is funny about today that's not political, I will talk about.
Well, very nice. So I know you just came back from Korea. Did you have any other challenges in your trip?
Oh, yes. So my husband is very much able-bodied and walks a lot faster than me. So walking around Seoul, which is where he's stationed, he's active duty, walking around Seoul and traveling in Seoul was actually a challenge, mainly because of my knee problems. Now, I have a brace that was issued to me by the Veterans Administration because I used to be active duty as well, but it's not working correctly. So I didn't have, it's not fitting right. So I didn't have the support that I needed for my knee. So I had to dial everything back like maybe 50%. but it still had to constantly remind him, hey, slow down. I can't go that far. I can't go that fast. And really just conserve my energy. And then I had trouble sleeping. Everybody has trouble sleeping. I get that. But the PTSD has given me a particularly hard time about sleeping. So you don't sleep, you don't have any energy, and then you're in pain. And that's just not a good way to travel.
Okay. Now, you mentioned you had an emotional comfort dog. I'm guessing because of difficulties, he probably didn't go with you to Seoul?
No. What I learned actually was that in order to even just take my dog with me to South Korea, there were certain forms that had to be filled out, and not any veterinarian could do it. Not only that, but I would have also needed to research the laws in Seoul and for South Korea in general with regard to how they would treat my dog, whether they treat her as a pet or whether they treat her as a status just above that because she's not a service dog. And so for all those complicated reasons, and I didn't know how she would handle the flight either, because the flight from Toronto, so I flew from Baltimore to Toronto, that was about an hour and a half. Toronto to Seoul was 14 hours. And I didn't want to put her through that.
Yeah, that would be a real tough time. When we went, I was in the military as well. I flew from Travis Air Force Base in California to Kadena in Okinawa with one quick stop, but our pet couldn't fly with us, so we had to send her via air freight. She got on a flight. We had a little cat. She had to go in a carrier, get checked, and she flew the same time. She flew nonstop, but it was about 12 hours from San Francisco to Okinawa. And
I think the only way Piper would have made that trip is if I'd given her enough trazodone to just knock her out.
Yeah, I think we gave our cat a little bit of a tranquilizer, probably not enough. And then my wife had to, here we are, brand new to Okinawa. My wife had to negotiate getting a cab to the airport, picking up the cat, trying to find a way to get back to the base. And I was tied up in processing and couldn't help. And it's just one of those things.
Right. And that's one of those things like even my husband didn't really understand, because like I told him, I said, I understand that you missed the dog, but you're asking for a lot of trouble on my end to bring the dog because you miss her. And she's not really going to be much help while I'm over there. So I just put her in a pet resort where she gets plenty of extra playtime and she loves the people there. So.
Yeah. All right. Well, very good. Do you find that because you're, and Linda, I do see your comment and I appreciate you being on the show live. I'm going to come back. I will come back to you in just a minute, but I had one question that I wanted to ask first. And that is, do you find that when you take advantage of the disabled line, that you get a lot of, let's say, negative attention because it's not visible?
So what I've learned to do, because I used to worry about that too. So back in April, when it was Major League Baseball's opening day, my husband and I went to the Baltimore Orioles game at Camden Yards. Now, I'd never noticed before that there was a disability line, but there was, which I was thankful for, because the regular line to get in seemed like a mile long because it was opening day. So I looked up, I saw the sign, and I said, come on, honey, let's, get through the disabled line. And he's like, wait, but I'm not disabled. I said, but you're with me, you're my companion, therefore you can go. And so I wasn't even concerned about it. I essentially put blinders on and just went. But 2 months before that, in the Jacksonville International Airport, I felt weird using the disability line. And so I asked the guy if I could use the disability line, and he was like, and I explained that I couldn't stand for very long and that there was no way I can make it through that line without significant pain. And he said, well, why didn't you just get a wheelchair at the airline desk? I said, because I don't need a wheelchair. I just need to not stand in a line. I just need a shorter line. And he like wasn't comprehending it. And I just kept trying to explain it. And finally, he was tired of me trying to explain it. So he just let me through the line.
Yeah, that is, it is a shame that people don't comprehend it. Like I said, that's the one thing I guess, I don't want to say fortunate, but that's the one thing that is easier for my wife and I.
Mm-hmm.
If my wife's in a wheelchair and we either pushing her in her, well, we're usually pushing her in her wheelchair.
Mm-hmm.
And so in general, I don't have as much an issue, with her going through.
Right. If I'm not limping, if you don't hear me out of breath, if you don't see me sweating, if I'm wearing the knee brace and you don't see it, I imagine there are people giving me the side eye. But again, by that time, I've probably put blinders on because I now no longer care. So what I've done is I've changed the nature of the way I approach it. So instead of saying, can I use, I say, do you have? Do you have a shorter line for people with disabilities? Do you have a disabled line? Because I'm not asking you for permission to be what I already am. I just want to know, do you have this accessible thing?
Yeah, and that is such a good attitude about it. Linda's here, and I see somebody else but I don't see somebody that has made a comment. So if you're watching and you haven't made a comment, do me a favor, go ahead and hit the comment so your name will pop up. Linda was saying that she missed a connection at DFW. Yeah, and DFW is one of those places I used to fly quite a bit for a living, and I hated, especially if you're flying American and you have to go one American gate to the other, because there's like three American concourses like right in a row there, and it can be 40 or 50 gates. They have a shuttle, or you can get a cart, and again, like I said, we use that sometimes, but they also have like I guess it's a tram thing that you can use, but you got to know where it is and how to get to it. I fly through Atlanta all the time. In Atlanta, you can wind up walking forever as well.
I found that out in Atlanta. And that's the other thing about traveling with the some of these invisible wheelchairs, not wheelchairs. I happen to see Linda's comment, sorry, about the invisible disabilities, is that I've got your viewers and your listeners have probably heard of the spoon theory, where you have so many spoons and you've got to manage those spoons, and those spoons can represent your energy level or your pain level throughout the day. But when you've never been to a certain airport before, you don't realize how big it is or how far it is to get from the domestic terminal to the international terminal, or this, that, and the other. Then it's hard to manage those things properly. So what I have benefited from getting a ride in the little golf cart thing, yes. Did I know I needed it? No. So by the time I get to the gate, maybe 40 minutes has passed or something like that, or maybe I've gone through 40 gates and I just didn't know that it was that far away.
Yeah, and that is a challenge. And I like Linda's comment here. We're going to this is kind of a freewheeling interview. I like Linda's comment about people jumping ahead. And I am pretty bad about if we're going to get on an elevator, I'm going to be jammed right up against the door, because you're not getting between me and the elevator. But I have, I talk about my wife's challenge with mobility, but she also is claustrophobic.
Oh.
And sometimes getting on an elevator with her is, sometimes you can't get her on the elevator if there's too many people in it. And I've finally gotten to the point that if it's a small elevator, I will pull in far enough for the door to close, and I'll say, my wife's got claustrophobia. I'll send the elevator back, and I just let it close. And, people get irritated, but I'm sorry. Yeah. I have got to if we're on our way to a gate, we've got to get to the gate. And I can't let 100 of you get in front of us this time and another 100 the next time.
And you stop being polite after a while, because you really have to assert yourself in a way that you feel like you shouldn't have to.
Yeah, I agree 100% with that. And again, you don't want to. I tell you, the place I've seen it worst is on cruise ships.
Really?
Yeah, and it's funny because you wind up, there's areas of the cruise ship where there will be a lot of congestion, and they don't have maybe enough elevators, and you can be you have to excuse me, I'm shivering a little bit. It's a little cool in the office I'm in tonight. But people will just cut in front of you and cut in front of you. And again, you just have to get to the point you're rude and jam the wheelchair up against the door and say, I dare you to try to get past me now.
Right.
Anyway, let me welcome Murray Lundberg. I'm going to pop his comment up. For those of you that don't know who Murray Lundberg is, he is the author of Murray's Guide to the South Klondike Highway. He's a retired tour guide. He's suffered some traumatic brain injury recently, and he's having some challenges dealing with it. We're glad to have you on the show,
Hi, Murray.
Let's see. Let me pop up. Linda had a comment here. It was American, and they had someone. Yeah. Just pop her. Yeah, she agrees with me. It's bad on cruise ships. And what I would say is that, and this would be my suggestion to you, Wendy. And I know that you say, well, you don't need a wheelchair, but at airports like DFW and Atlanta, I would just request it from the airline. And I've seen people with that just have, a little old or knee or something, and they're doing it. And I would not feel bad. And I like I said, Atlanta, you can walk forever.
And I did walk forever because I didn't know, and no one told me. I knew it was huge, but I just, what I didn't know was so much.
Yeah. And that's an interesting thing. And one of the things that I'm kind of, let's say, working on is in the background and right now I'm thinking about it from the aspect of cruise ships, but I'm thinking that there's would be value in providing a guide that details cruise ports, cruise ships, cruise ports. It talks about handicapped accessibility and what to expect. A good example is in a wheelchair. If you go to a port that they tender, that means you're getting off of one ship that may be moving a little bit onto another ship that may be moving a little bit. And that can be a challenge, especially if you have real problems moving.
Yeah. With
some cruise lines, they're not so bad. They, and some of the tenders aren't too bad. Others are really tough, especially if it's a like a lifeboat. They're just not really geared to put a wheelchair or a scooter or something into or on. And I think that, that's actually probably something to be worthwhile for airports, so that you knew, what the potential difference was in distance you might have to walk.
Right. Because at BWI, not a big deal.
Yeah.
Even though it's a fairly busy international airport, it's not unmanageable for me. But Toronto, Seoul, and Atlanta, those were challenges.
Well, and Toronto's kind of an interesting airport too, in that, and you were talking about some of the stuff that you dealt with. A lot of people don't realize that you can have trouble getting through Toronto if you have anything like a DWI on your record. But
yeah, I think I remember you saying something about that before.
Yeah, and so there's just so many of these things. And again, it becomes back to, okay, how do you find it and try to make it where it's, and that's kind of the goal of my channel, is to make, at least for those that have to travel with some kind of challenge, try to make it helpful.
And one of the things that I didn't used to do is I didn't used to check luggage. I would always travel with a carry-on. And in fact, when I went to South Korea, I only had my backpack and a carry-on. Carry-on was kind of heavy though. But I was afraid to ask for a wheelchair because I didn't want to have to check my bag. Because one time when I did actually have an injury and I was flying, they made me check my bag, which I really didn't like. And that I felt like that just made it more of a hassle for me. But in the end, it was better that I didn't have the extra bag with me.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting. My wife and I always check our big bag, but we've not had any problem. Well, of course, I'm usually with her. So
Hmm.
that makes a difference because usually I'm dragging the carry-ons and I'll carry them on and put them on.
Yeah.
I am a fan of if you have challenges, I think checking bags, and I don't know, it should be free. I don't probably isn't.
Well, I know that. Well, I usually domestically, I usually fly Southwest, um, and I don't think it's free. The only time it's usually free is when they're like, "Oh, we may not have enough room, so who wants to volunteer to check their bag?" And then they'll waive the fee. But when I flew Air Canada, which is what I flew back and forth to Seoul, and that I actually leave on the 25th to do the same trip again. First and second bag are free. So I will definitely be checking my bag this time around. But
Yeah,
the other thing I've become accustomed to doing is requesting pre boarding, um, so that I can take my time, especially on a Southwest flight, have that aisle seat or the seat where there's more leg room, so that I don't have further issues with my knee.
yeah, and with Southwest, you don't have the option, but I know we fly Delta quite a bit. And by the way, I want to acknowledge Murray's comment. Said he was shocked by people's impatience at airports when he was in a wheelchair with no assistance. Yeah, it is. It is amazing how people just don't appreciate, and at some point in time, and you don't want to wish anything bad on them, but I think that every able-bodied person, it ought to be a requirement in school or somewhere along the way in their life course that they ought to have to spend a week in a wheelchair
Hmm.
learning to deal with it or facing difficulties in some other way so that they,
Right.
Linda said she always gets assistance. Just because, and I probably was not as patient as I should have been, before my wife got injured or,
Hmm.
before she had to have a wheelchair. I still sometimes have a problem, and I try to walk behind her. And this is
Hmm.
something you might suggest for your husband when you
Okay.
go back to Seoul, is have him walk behind you,
Hmm.
and tell you which way to go. But have him, if he walks behind you, he won't run off and leave you.
This is very true.
And I mean, I'm just sharing what my wife makes me do sometimes
Hmm.
because it is a challenge when you're able-bodied, and you're not hurting
Hmm.
to you just get in the zone of where you want to go.
Hmm.
And I have to turn around, I look back, and my wife's, half a block back, and then I stop and I wait. And then I
Right.
get behind her and I say, okay, here's where we want to go.
Yeah, and to Murray's comment too about people being impatient about wheelchairs. I had a wheelchair for a little while when I first they didn't they gave it to me at the VA when they first discovered I had sciatica. I don't know why they thought it would help, but they gave it to me, so I used it. And it was a manual chair, and in a hilly city like Baltimore, that's just not cool, not cool at all. And so I didn't have a car at the time, and I was taking public transportation everywhere. And whether I had the chair or not, when that bus stopped and it was delayed because a wheelchair was coming on or getting off, people were outrageously rude, especially if the person didn't need the chair all the time. And so I would hear people say things like, "Oh, they don't need the chair, they can walk." Like I saw them walking 2 days ago. Like, dude, why are you doing that? You don't know why they're in the chair right now. Like, that doesn't even make any sense. Like, why would you be like that? But that happened all the time on certain bus lines.
Yeah, it is very definitely a challenge. And again, all we can try to do is educate the people in general. But the challenge is that too many people now focus on what they need, what they want, and they're not interested in doing what else. What are some of the things that you wind up having to do? And for those that are in the comments, I've seen some comments. If you want to share something, actually, I want to go back to one more thing first. With my wife, one of the things we always do is we put it in the disability comment in when we make a reservation,
Mm-hmm.
because then sometimes you wind up with doesn't help on Southwest, but sometimes you'll wind up getting better seats and not
Okay.
having to pay for them. Because
Oh, okay.
like bulkhead seats and stuff, sometimes they'll help you out with that so that you have the legroom. Because my wife's really tall and she's kind of short torso and she's got really long legs, and then with her back problem and stuff, it's just really hard for her to get in a narrow row.
Now I noticed. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, that's fine. Go ahead.
I noticed on Air Canada, even though I was in economy, I did have a good amount of legroom, but I could have used more. So a simple bump up to premium economy would have actually helped tremendously. Unfortunately, if I bought a premium economy ticket straight out, that's double the cost of the economy ticket.
Yeah. And so I would at least put it in there and, and then when you get to the gate, check with the gate agent, get there a little early and ask them if they can do anything. Sometimes, like I said, it all depends on the airline policy and to some extent on the gate agent as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because I've seen some that were super accommodating. I've seen others that were not so much, it just depends. Anything else that you wind up doing to prepare and to make your travels go smoother?
I pack all my medications in my backpack. I have quite a number of them, and I leave them in their original bottles. And I put all of those in my backpack, my inhalers in my backpack, and I have a large container of glucose tablets for emergencies. That's also in my backpack. I always carry at least one thing to drink. That's usually a water bottle, and I might also have a soda or something with simple carbohydrates, just in case my blood sugar goes low and I don't want to take the glucose tablets, because glucose tablets are kind of nasty. I'm not going to lie. They're not the best tasting thing in the world. I'd much rather have a Coke. But I have all those things so that there's no question about what or why I'm carrying it. I always make sure these days to request, I did this in Seoul, to request to see if there's any kind of fast pass to get through security. So I was able to get that in Seoul, didn't end up needing it. And I was able to get that in Vancouver, because on the way back, I had to stop in Vancouver before I got to Toronto. The other thing is to double check your itinerary to make sure that you don't have these obnoxiously long or obnoxiously short layovers, because nobody wants the stress. But at the same time, you don't want to sit in the airport for 12 hours and be uncomfortable.
Yeah, I'm very much that way too. I try to take a real hard look at it. I'd much rather, and for work, I have access. I had a credit card that would get us access into Delta Sky Club, which is a nice place to wait.
Mm-hmm.
But again, I try really hard. My goal is about an hour and a half to 2.5 hour window, because that way, if my plane is late coming in, I'm not trying to run through the airport. I've been in that situation by myself where I had 15 minutes to go 25 gates.
Mm-hmm.
And I could do that. But with my wife, there would be no way we could get her wheelchair out of underneath, up the jetway, and all of those things. It just wouldn't work.
Exactly. And the other thing is, because when I got to Toronto, I had 12 hours between Vancouver and Toronto. And I really hadn't slept. So I found out that the Vancouver airport has a hotel inside where they have day rooms that you can use for up to 8 hours. Now, in the end, because of the room I chose and how long I stayed in there, it ended up costing me a little over $300. But the room was absolutely wonderful. It's called the Fairmont Hotel. The room was absolutely wonderful. I had a concierge up on the top level. There was a private lounge with a TV and Wi-Fi and free food and free non-alcoholic drinks. So I got a lot of value out of that $330, but all I wanted to do was sleep. And I slept, I felt in like the most comfortable bed ever for like 4 hours or something like that. But I just needed something to bide my time that didn't involve me sitting at a gate for 12 hours.
Yeah, that's again, for us, if we had, I'd probably do something like that. Some of the airports, like Atlanta's got them. I'm trying to think where else I just came back from, because I've flown recently and I saw it at both airports. But they've got these little mini rooms that you can rent, basically rest by the hour.
Yes. Those are awesome.
Yeah.
And Toronto has a couple of lounges. One is there's a Maple Leaf Lounge for premium economy and up if you're flying Air Canada. But there's also another lounge where you can pay for a set number of hours for access to, and you don't have to be a certain club member or anything. So that's a helpful thing too. And again, the food is included. Whatever they have in there to drink is included. There's TVs in there. There's usually showers as well. There's just no bed.
Yeah. And that's kind of the way the Delta lounges are. There's no bed, but there's good Wi-Fi, and it's not quite as crowded. And you're not sitting, especially if you have like your gate may have 3 or 4 flights between you and the next flight.
Yeah.
Then you stake a spot out, and all these people are coming and going and stepping on you and dragging bags over the top of you. Murray made the comment that he likes 2 hours at the airport as well, and I think 2 hours in general is a great number, because like I said, they provide you some coverage if things don't go the way you want them to go.
He also likes the Fairmont hotels. He says they are superb. I agree with you, Murray. I'll stay in another one. I'll stay again.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've never flown in and out of Canada other than on a military flight. I was when I was in the Air Force, I went up to Cold Lake for a month and enjoyed my time up there, but that was military up and military back. And a C-130 and a base airport is not the best way to travel.
No, it is not.
But it's, like I said, I am a fan, like I said, of airport lounges in general. Anything else you want to share with our audience that they need to know, either from if they're traveling themselves, or maybe some encouragement for people that don't have mobility issues on moving? I don't know, say moving here. Like moving out of your way. But I mean, on dealing your, I don't know, say this, being courteous, I guess would be a great word right there to those that have challenges.
Number one, because I forgot to mention this before, I do have TSA pre-check now in global entry, so that I can move through lines faster. Do I resent a little having to pay for it? Yeah. But you got to pay to play in this case, unless you're automatically getting that wheelchair access that you and Linda have recommended so far. As far as courtesy goes, I think it's really just a shift in perspective, because you can look at it. You can look at the person in the wheelchair or the person who's walking slower as somebody who's in your way. Or you can reframe it and say, you know what, I understand this person has challenges. Let me not be in their way. Or let me see if I can help them in any way, because it looks like they're struggling. A lot of people, invisible disabilities or visible disabilities, are probably going to be okay. And they're probably going to say, no, thank you, I don't need any help. Because we want to be able to do for ourselves. We don't want to feel like we're disabled. We want to live that normal life as much as possible. But we live in a world like Linda said, people have become very judgmental when they can't see what's wrong with you, and because they can't see it, they're not processing it. They don't understand it, and there's no universal symbol for people who have invisible disabilities. Everyone sees the person in the symbol in the wheelchair and thinks, if it's not a cane, if it's not a walker, if it's not a wheelchair, then it must not be valid. But the more we make ourselves known to the people who need to service us, I think the better it's going to be in the future. And for the people who get annoyed with us, I don't pay them any attention anymore, because they're not worth. I only have so much energy. They're not worth. It's generally not worth the interaction, because if they're giving me a crazy look, or if they say something like "you look fine," which, by the way, no one has ever said to me, and probably because my face says "don't say that to me," I don't want to waste my time thinking about those people. It's easier said than done. It's just practice. It's really just practice, and putting those blinders on and saying, I'm entitled to this. This is what I need. and I'm going to get the thing I need to make it through the day. And that's nobody's business but yours. And able-bodied people are either going to take it or they're going to leave it. But you don't owe them an explanation. You don't owe them anything, really. You don't, I used to, when I would show up to my therapy appointments in the VA and I'd get into an elevator, some older guy would always be like, "Why don't you smile?" And after so many of those, I finally just snapped on one guy and I said, "Why? To make you feel better? Because I clearly don't feel like smiling. So stop telling me what to do." I felt a little bad about that, but it was the truth. He wasn't thinking about me or how I was. He was thinking about how it would make him feel. And that wasn't fair to me. So whether your disabilities are visible or invisible, or whether you're able-bodied, we all have to be more compassionate to other people, especially because we don't know what they're going through, whether that's mental or physical or emotional. We just don't know.
Yeah, and I would agree. And for those that aren't facing challenges that are watching the show today, thanks for staying with us and watching it. But I would say, I would share this too, that, it's not that hard and it doesn't cost that much to be kind.
Exactly.
Exactly. Like I said, until you've walked in another person's shoes, I see Murray's comment, "Well, you look fine."
Mm-hmm.
And, and like I said, Murray's, he understands entirely what we're talking about.
Yeah.
You can look fine on the outside and just be a total disaster on the inside. And,
and I feel like that's so many people.
I think it is, and I think it's more and more so that the people around you are facing challenges in a variety of ways. And the sad thing is that, even if they're facing a challenge, they don't necessarily recognize, well, hey, maybe she's got a challenge of her own. Maybe I should be nice. Yeah. Okay. Well, listen, I appreciate you being with me on the show tonight, Wendy. And like I said, if you'll stick around for a second afterwards. Thanks to our guests. Thanks to Murray and Linda for participating. For those of you that are watching, thank you so much. Do me a favor. In the links below, you'll see a link to Wendy's blog and Wendy's website. You'll see a link to my or to my YouTube channel. Please do me a favor. If you like this and you like content that's designed to be useful, please go ahead and hit the like button and the subscribe button. Those things help us continue with what we're doing. And I'll probably have Wendy back on again. But thanks everybody for being here.
Thank you.